several hospitals are once again feeling the pinch of an increase in COVID-19 cases, possibly driven by the Delta COVID variant. The health department reported 8,167 new COVID-19 cases on Monday. This is the fourth straight day that the country breached the 8,000 mark in daily fresh infections.
Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship, Joey Concepcion, reiterates that it is best to have a lockdown this August if it means saving possible business earnings for the fourth quarter.
It cannot be a permanent solution. When everybody is fully vaccinated, then the country will be much, much safer. We don't need to do lockdowns anymore.
More than 9 million Filipinos have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, while Metro Manila prepares for another lockdown starting this Friday due to a rapid rise in cases. How will the impending ECQ help contain transmission? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this special edition of The Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama po natin Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5 and Ed Lingao of One News. And mamaya sasamahan tayo ni Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Chiefs, happy Monday!
Happy Monday!
Happy Monday!
Mukhang the whole country is bracing for ECQ.
Yes, I know. And it feels like ECQ, especially in the checkpoint areas already. Diba?
Nag-tighten na eh.
Naka-set up na yung PNP eh. Oo
yung
5
mga-
days early.
Yung mga LGU surrounding NCR, meron ng mga border control. Diba? Seryoso na.
Yes, yeah.
Bok, very quickly, ano pang mga binabantayan natin na balita?
Well, there's also Carlos Yulo. I
He
think
almost
Say-
made it!
sayang, no?
Oh
Yung,
my!
Sayang.
He had, do you know that he had the highest score for a single jump?
Oh,
Kung hindi lang talaga nag-land out of the mat
Landing.
yung leg niya. Yeah, no? Panalo yun. Baka nag-silver.
Wala na gumawa ng
pa eh.
mattress yun eh.
Okay. Siguro naman, alam nyo na yung pinag-uusapan namin. Fourth place si Colayulo. But the good news is, he's 21. Very young. Tinitingnan ko nga yung
Yes,
edad ng
yes.
mga kalaban niya. May 26,
Yes.
may 28. So he has at least 2
Yes.
more Olympics in him.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, pero the big story today, of course, is still COVID, still a rising case. We're looking at Cebu, the hospital situation there. And speaking of hospitals, our first guest with us tonight. Teka muna, sorry before pala we go to our first guest, kasi big news din to, no? Speaking of Kaloy Yulo, he did finish 4th at the vault event in the 2020 Olympics. Here we have a quick soundbite of him right after his run. No, sorry, we'll get back to that later. Sige, tonight, let's start our conversation.
Sabihin tayo.
That wasn't quite as quick.
Hindi niyo po na-miss. Hindi ko nakabilisan. We'll bring it back later. Technical problems lang. But tonight, let's start with COVID-19 treatment czar, One Hospital Command Center Chief Undersecretary Leopoldo Vega. Good evening, Yusek Vega.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, Robbie.
Good evening, sir.
And good evening to all the chiefs. Sir.
Sir, let's start with the situation. Kasi, well, kanina we opened sa big story with scenes from Cebu. We're talking, of course, about going back to ECQ, and then backdrop dito, DOH is also saying, nako, baka tumaas. Let's brace ourselves, tataas ang cases, ang active cases sa Metro Manila. How prepared are we, sir? Kamusta ang mga ospital natin?
Thank you, Robbie. I think we all know the perspective here in terms of the gradual increase of this COVID-19 new cases and the active cases. If you take a rundown in terms of the whole Philippines, you'd see that there is an increasing trend, a steep increase in the Luzon, and of course, there's also an increase in the Visayas region, and there seems to be a plateau somewhere in Mindanao, but still very high. Regions 1 and Regions 3 and Regions 4A, together with NCR, Region 6 and 7, this had shown steadily increase. In fact, in the NCR, we've seen a steep increase coming from 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, the NCR was just accumulating 600 new cases per day. But now we've reached, to this date, we've reached 1,007 in a day's time. So in other words, there's really a big jump. And this is worrisome because we're dealing here with a different kind of beast. This is the new coronavirus, which is highly transmissible. And we really need to do some preemptive actions, no? So that we can control the transmission and, of course, not overwhelm our hospitals. In terms of the healthcare utilization in the Philippines, we're still in the low-risk position, but however, in the intensive care units across the country, it is now almost 57%, and this is nearing the threshold of moderate increase or moderate risk. So here in Metro Manila, we're still in the low-risk position from the health capacity utilization rate, HCUR. However, the intensive care unit is also, or the ICU rates are going up. This is also within the range of 56 to 57%, slowly, gradually increasing. So this is a bit worrisome because the steep rise might make the capacity of the hospitals not able to cope up with the number of new and active cases around.
What do you think will be the impact of the ECQ, given that it will only run for 2 weeks? Malaking tulong na ba yun, sir?
Right. The impact of this ECQ basically is just to prevent transmission. In other words, we have to decrease the mobility and and the aggregation of many people to produce super spreader events. And lessening that would mean that it would lessen the transmission because the virus behaves in a very linear fashion. It just looks for a host. That's what it does. So the only way that we can do this is to prevent this virus from seeking a host, replicate, and mutate. And the thing to do here is to be very aggressive in terms of your community quarantine so that people will now not move around and making sure that the transmission is decreased. Also, with the 2 weeks program, we can easily ramp up the vaccination. You know very well that the pillars here really is on prevention and the scaling up of the vaccination, because this vaccination will really produce the protective wall of the community. So these are, I think, the necessary things that we have to do in these 2 weeks. And if there is an increase or depends on the trend that's happening in the next 2 weeks, it could either de-escalate or escalate. But the thing is, we have to take this ECQ position to make sure that we can lessen the transmission.
Sir, looking at the utilization rates in Metro Manila, sabi nyo nga, nasa low risk pa yung Metro Manila, pero sa ICU, malapit-lapit na sa moderate risk. I'm wondering if you've done any projections. If the trend continues, when would we hit a red line in terms of utilization?
Yeah, there are projections conducted by the Department of Health, and basically it has projections are just looking into the worst and the best case scenarios, and you have to do assumptions here. And the assumption here is the first assumption that they took in terms of this projection is the mobility of people around. Second is the contagiousness of the virus, which is 60 to 80%. And of course, the degree of the vaccination that can move around. So with this kind of projection and assumptions, they believe that if we don't do anything here, this might triple and quadruple in 2 to 3 weeks' time.
That's the worst case scenario, sir.
No, that's not even the worst case. Meaning to say that if we don't institute the ECQ or we don't do the necessary kind of quarantine escalation, it might go still higher.
How much of this is just going around the circles, given that Delta is so highly transmissible? So, meaning to say, unless we wipe it out completely, which is improbable, diba, then it will just continue to infect more and more at the same rate, right? I mean, or does it weaken over time? And in a way, we're buying time right now to weaken the virus. Is that the idea?
No, no, the virus will always find a host and make, it's their biological imperative that they have to evolve
Yes.
and they mutate, and that's the very
That's
evolution
their
of the
mode of
virus.
survival.
Yeah. Whether
Yes.
this mutation becomes very benign, which something happened during the Spanish flu, wherein people actually, many died, but then the virus mutated at a certain point, and it became less harm. It became less harmful,
Okay.
and it
Yeah.
became just like an ordinary flu. And this is what we hope for in this pandemic,
Okay.
that this virus could mutate into something that's going to be very benign and not so virulent, because we can never be certain where the trajectory of mutation would be, whether it's going to be something that's going to be harmless or something more virulent. But what we're seeing here with this Delta virus is that their mutation coming from their source in India, it seems that they have changed their kind of spike proteins, wherein they have mutated to be very transmissible and can have a very high viral load when it's being transmitted to a person. So in other words, the trajectory of this is really infectious. So in other words, the only way that we can prevent this virus from seeking a host is therefore to prevent people from moving around, since most of us are unvaccinated. We don't even have the necessary protection or immunity with us. Some might have the natural immunity coming from the natural infection, but in terms of the vaccine, we're still 30%. So there's a very high risk, therefore, that this virus can really find a host and infect 8 people at a certain time, because the reproductive number of this is roughly 8. So one person can easily infect 8 people. So it's going to be very exponential.
Yusek, and this reproductive number is precisely why it brings up the question about our capacity and our hospital capacities. You've talked about that, but I want to talk about the human resource also. Kasi kanina rin ni-report namin ng Cebu. Cebu, for one, is saying they'll need to find an additional 300 health workers. What's the situation on the national level and here in NCR?
Well, with the NCR right now, since we're still in the low risk position and nearing the moderate risk in terms of the ICU, we still have the capacity. In other words, it's still very manageable. But the reason why we're doing a very aggressive and early ECQ is that we really would like to stop the transmission and increasing, because if you have an increase in this transmission or reproduction rate of this virus, you'd have more cases, more hospitalization, and even more critical and even more deaths. So the only way to prevent an overwhelmed hospital or a strained hospital is really to prevent this virus from making havoc in terms of its infection rate. So in terms of the human resource, we have augmented already some of the healthcare facilities here. Starting last January, we provided almost 10,500 healthcare workers across the country, and Cebu was a recipient of this. But in Cebu right now, the private hospitals are needing more, because some of the private hospitals, they have an experience of these healthcare workers moving towards the public sector, because you know very well that the public sector, in terms of the nurses or the other paramedical, would have a higher salary compared with the private. So this is one way that one of the things we're looking into and providing augmentation with the private sector in Cebu, as we did this last year when they also had a surge.
Dr. Vega, we'd like to bring in Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
Hi, good
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Mami.
Yusek, you can tell us, ano bang difference ng response ngayon and the response during the summer surge? Kasi ang sabi ng ibang negosyante, nagreklamo sila, lockdown daw ng lockdown. Well, I know you're building capacities for hospitalization. Saka yung medyo nagbago naman ng konti, yung medyo maluwag naman sa restriction, may papayagang businesses. But sabi nila there should be more capacity building, especially in contact tracing, for example.
Right,
Ba yung
right, ma'am.
pagkakaiba ngayon na madadagdagan and reassure na talagang may pakinabang tong 2 weeks na lockdown na to?
Tama, Mami. Ano mo, totally different yung what we had last year, ano? Because with this kind of ECQ or escalation right now, it's happening when we already saw this trend of steep increases, especially with the NCR and the neighboring provinces. So in other words, what we're seeing right now is that we don't want to have that kind of experience that we had last year when we decided to do escalation. The hospitals were already on a strained position or overwhelmed. So I think at this time, because we know very well that this virus is very infectious, we are seeing now the trend of it, that it's really going up. And we really have to stop it at or just do something very preemptive to make sure that you really stop the transmission and also allow the hospitals to cater and serve the other COVID patients that we are having. And secondly, I think in terms of the contact tracing, the DILG right now is very much aggressive in terms of contact tracing to the third generation. And we've always said, and what's different right now is that we are emphasizing to the DILG, who's now on top of the tracing and isolation, to make sure that they are able to do active case finding or isolate and detect and trace at once in less than 48 hours. So if they can do that in less than 48 hours, the projection would say that the reproductive rate would really go down, or the transmission would go down. So the operative word here is that they have to be very aggressive in terms of detection, case finding, and of course contact tracing to make sure that the transmission is really decreased to a very minimum.
How about compared to the surge? I'm asking about the surge. Ito lang na March and April. Yun ang sinasabi ng mga negosyante. Is there any significant improvement in our capacities for...
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Of course, yes, ma'am. In terms of the capacity, since last year, we had our lessons in terms of the health capacity and the system, the health system here in the Philippines. We knew very well that we didn't have enough infrastructures, especially here for Metro Manila. And last year, we were only dealing with about 730 intensive care units, basically for COVID. So we really decided to ramp up the intensive care units because basically that's what the critically and severe cases would need, and definitely would also impact on your mortality or case fatality rate. So we actually improved in terms on the improvement of the infrastructure by making more ICU in different hospitals, allocate more, and also transforming some of the rooms into ICUs to cater to this kind of patients. So we did it ramp up, and we have a total right now of almost 1,230 ICU dedicated for COVID here in the NCR.
Sir, kasi the word that we heard at least as of last week was that hanapan pa ng DILG ng budget yung contact tracers kasi nag-expire na o mag-expire na. Well, last we heard nga, they were asking DBM to source funding. I'm wondering where we are there. And kasi it is a major point of concern.
Yeah, right. Tama yan, Ed. That's the reason why they asked, because Bayanihan, that was really part of Bayanihan 1 and 2. And
Yes, sir.
therefore, the funding of this actually expired last June 30. But I know there are some amount of savings until the probable of August, or until August and September. And this is the reason why we've been asking also, not just the DILG, but the Department of Health, DBM, in terms of making sure that we can continue with the augmentation of our healthcare workers across the country.
Yeah.
Yes. Pero sir, sigurado na po yun? I mean, have we found the funding? Kasi you're talking about you're sure that there is funding somewhere, pero I don't know if anybody's talking about actually finding the funding.
I can be sure, Ed. It's we asked it and requested already from the DBM. So I'm sure they are going to find a source for this because healthcare workers augmentation for the nurses for the different facilities, and of course the contact tracers or the surveillance team of the DILG is really needed in terms of making sure that we are able to respond properly.
Yusek, kumustahin lang po namin ang One Hospital Command Center, and a quick clarification. Yung One Hospital Command Center, is that just for NCR, or now that we're talking about so many outbreaks in different regions, is that a nationwide system?
Yeah, right. When we started off with the One Hospital Command last year, we really focused on the National Capital Region because that's where the focus started. And then apparently, as the next few waves came about, we had to make sure that we need to come up with regional One Hospital Command. So we are now establishing one regional One Hospital Command in different regions, in Region 3, in Region 4, and then we have in Visayas and also in Mindanao. So gradually, we're trying to improve and expand the One Hospital Command so that they will have a better coordination also in the regional level and down up to the national level.
If you could just... So go ahead, Luchi.
No, I was going to say, I think that some good news coming from the effect of the vaccines, is that hospitals are reporting less severe cases, given that even the fully vaccinated admissions are in the mild or moderate category only. Is this consistent across all the hospitals in the country, or so far we haven't had enough numbers yet to really say for sure?
It's so hard to draw a conclusion in that, but we are seeing very much improvement in terms of the rate of hospitalization for vaccinated people. But let me relate to you the experience of Israel, because we had some Israel experts who came around last week. There were technical people, clinicians, and they were telling us and relating to us that since they're the first country to reach the 90% vaccination, what they experienced was in the first few waves that they had, whenever they had a rise in terms of the number of cases, definitely the number of hospitalizations would also increase and the number of deaths would also increase. But when they reached 90% of their vaccination, or people were getting vaccinated, there was a disconnect now between the rise in the number of new cases with hospitalization and death. So in other words, there was no longer any relation. It remained flat, very minimal, and the hospitalization and even deaths are very minimal when they had a 90% of their population vaccination. So at this point, there was a disconnect in terms of the rise in the number of the new cases that they had. So that was very significant, and it also proves that since the first country actually to reach the 90%, I think it's a very good information that if we do ramp up really the vaccination, it will really provide a kind of protective immunity that the community can have.
Yusek, since you mentioned Israel, they've started a booster shot for their fully vaccinated people. And the report today, even in the UK, nag-uumpisa na rin sila with booster shots.
Yes.
I know we don't have enough vaccines yet, but you're the treatment czar. In case we have enough people vaccinated, would you recommend booster shot as well?
Right now, Mami, I think I don't think it is very right to even talk of booster shots when 70% of the population don't even have a single shot of this vaccine. Now, I guess as we move on, there are many clinical studies now and showing that the effective booster is really very significant in terms of the increase of the antibodies that they have in their blood. So, and it will also provide better protection. And in Israel, they've related also to us that they will start soon with their booster shot. However, it is going to be in a niche for those immunocompromised patients, patients who are in dialysis or have cancers and so on and so forth, immunocompromised. That's what they will do, the booster shots. And then second wave would be the people who are elderly, more than 60 years old and with comorbidity. So that's the second wave of the. But they're now looking into the aspect really of doing a booster shot because they are in the position to do it because they're 90% vaccinated.
Yusek, in terms of our capacities at the hospitals, I remember months back when people were concerned about hospital utilization and they were also concerned about oxygen supply. I remember it was either you or Yusek Vergere that said na hindi, pagka may nakikita kayong nag-aagawan sa oxygen, that's probably people wanting oxygen in their private homes. And there was also a moment of education for us where somebody told us, no, actually, madali lang gumawa ng oxygen. Even hospitals in Metro Manila have facilities for that. But now that people are seeing these familiar scenes again in Cebu of people wanting to get their hands on oxygen, maybe you could just contextualize for us what people might be seeing or might be misconstruing about the oxygen situation in Cebu and in the country.
Okay, Robbie, in terms of the oxygen, I think we have tasked the Department of Trade and Industry to look into the output of the oxygen supply. And the oxygen suppliers here in Luzon, Mindanao, and Visayas, they have a total capacity of, on an average daily use right now, 205 tons per day. And this is what we have been, that was the output that they had during our surge last April. But their maximum output is they can actually do 600 tons per day. So in other words, there's still a big surplus in terms of the tons, the number of oxygen tons per day that they can actually produce. In terms of the hospitals having oxygen plants, it's very true. Most of the big hospitals, especially with the government-retained hospitals, they do have oxygen plants, meaning to say that they can actually generate oxygen and make and pass this oxygen to pipelines towards the different wards and to the different intensive care units. You don't need a cylinder there. You just actually make sure that you are able to do this built-in kind of piping for this oxygen to the different wards and intensive care units. So we do have this kind of hospitals here in Manila, in Visayas and Luzon. I think there are about 21 of these hospitals that have the capacity really of producing their own oxygens. And some of the oxygen tanks that you've seen in Cebu also meant that the emergency room at that time, because that was really a snapshot of a certain day, and the emergency room really at that time was full. And you know when you are in an emergency room, people you need to be assessed whether you are COVID positive or negative, and it will take time. Even if you do a gene expert RT-PCR, it will take about a minimum of 8 hours. So this is the reason sometimes that you have a queue in the hospitals because they don't know where to bring you, whether to a negative COVID ward or the positive COVID ward. So it's very important that they actually do the testing in for all the suspects and probable in the emergency room. And this is really what happens when you have an increase in the number of cases and active new cases, especially when all of them will really go to the hospital and look for support and services.
Okay. Undersecretary Leopoldo Vega, sir, maraming salamat po.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Ingat
sir.
po kayo.
Thank you po.
We'll need to take a break. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. Welcome back, the Chiefs, here on One News. Now, before we proceed with our second guest, let's hear what Carlos Caloy-Yulo had to say after his run at the 2020 Olympics.
Sobrang saya lang po na nabilang po ako sa kanila. Pumasok po ako sa finals. Hindi ko nga din po expected na may finals ako nung qualifications po. Pero swerte po talaga.
And I'm sure we join all of you in saying to Caloy-Yulo, we're all very proud of you. Mabuhay ka, Caloy, and sa lahat ng Team Philippines, hindi pa po tapos ang laban. Bukas, marami pa tayong babantayan. Now, joining us is Dr. Jose De Grano, President of the Private Hospitals Association of the Philippines. Good evening, Dr. De Grano.
Good evening po. Good evening.
Sir, nakita niyo naman, we were talking to Yusek Vega. Your perspective, sir, from the perspective of the private hospitals, kamusta po ang sitwasyon sa inyo? And are there any particular, whether it's nationwide or are there any particular regions that stand out for you as concerning?
Right now, of course, we are always focused sa National Capital Region. But right now, if there is some medyo slight increase pa lang tayo ngayon, but there is a steady upward increase in the number of cases. Although hindi ganun kabilis pa right now. And hopefully the ECQ will be able to resolve this so that the upward trend ay medyo makontrol natin. Of course, there are the surrounding regions. If you will note, the next one is Region 4A, Region 3, also Region 1 and 2 in the Northern Luzon. And now it's Region 7 or Cebu area in the Visayas, and of course Region 6 also. And then in Mindanao, it's Region 10, Northern Mindanao, and of course the Davao region, also Region 11. Medyo yun ang mga areas right now na nakafocus tayo because they have increasing active cases right now.
Oo nga po. I mean, how different is that from, I mean, we mentioned the previous surge. Na nung previous surge, talagang kahit paano nakatutok tayo sa NCR because the majority of the cases here. Now that it's spread out in different regions, how much more complex is this situation for you?
The problem now is these surrounding regions or the regions that I have mentioned do not have enough facilities like National Capital Region. No, in some areas there are no big hospitals. There are no isolation facilities as given by the local government units. So it's easier to fill up the different hospitals. And they only have a few government hospitals, mostly private hospitals, at medyo maliliit ang private hospitals dito. No? Unlike in Metro Manila, where we have the bigger or the big hospitals that can accommodate a lot of these patients.
Of course, the last time we had a surge, we also had a shortage of personnel.
Yes.
Especially nurses. And in fact, you were saying that there are enough beds, but not enough personnel or medical care workers. No? So how is the situation now as far as nurses and other health workers are concerned?
Ma'am Lucid, I think that's still the same right now. It's even, it may even become worse because after the last surge in April, there were a lot of nurses also who resigned. No, maybe around 5 to 10% of our previous number of nurses resigned after the surge. Maybe because they wanted to transfer to government facilities. Some took a rest. Some were already planning to go overseas. And so we are now presently waiting for the around 5,000 newly licensed nurses to apply to us, to the private hospitals or even to the government hospitals.
Kasi dati nagpadala pa ng government nurses sa Metro Manila, no? Can we expect the same kind of movement this time pag nag-surge, or will there be enough for the NCR man lang alone?
I don't think they can do that now. They got the nurses previously from the Visayas areas.
Ngayon sila rin
Ngayon sila
nagsisearch.
mataas na,
Yeah.
nagsisearch din sila. So, I don't think ganun, they can do that. Actually, some of the augmentation personnel in the Visayas areas, in the Iloilo areas, are from NCR already.
So baligtad na. Parang
Baligtad
doon
na.
nag-service.
Yes.
Sir, sabi niyo nga mga 5,000 newly licensed nurses ang inaasahan natin. Pero I suppose not all of them are in Metro Manila, and also I suppose that mamimili yan siyempre. Private ka ba or government? Now, given the
Yes.
fact na sa private hospitals, mas mababa yung sweldo, what kind of a situation are you looking at? Even with 5,000 additional licensed nurses?
Well, we're still waiting for them, At least, these new nurses still need experience, before they can really practice, So they can go wherever they want. If gusto nila sa government hospitals, of course, mas mataas ng konti ang sweldo. Imagine, mag-average ka ng around 33,000 a month. In private hospitals, it's only around, siguro mag-average din, including the non-monetary benefits, mga around less than 30,000. Yun doon sa mga big hospitals. But in smaller hospitals in the regions, in the provinces, of course, they cannot afford to give that amount to our nurses. So anyway, they will be choosing between, applying sa government hospitals where anong tawag nila, on job, job order pa lang sila. Yes, job JO lang, Not, but of course, the private hospitals are offering regular employment than the government hospitals.
Doctor, yung mga reports and images na nakaka-nervyos actually ngayong araw yung parang agawan ng mga oxygen tank sa Cebu.
Yes.
Are we actually more capable now, yung mga hospitals natin, for dealing with the surge similar to the one in March and April, considering na more contagious tong Delta and highly transmissible, sobra-sobra, within seconds daw nakakahawa? Are we actually more equipped now? How worried should we be?
I think, yes. I think we are, sinabi naman ni Yusek yun, We are more prepared right now. Actually, itong ating mga suppliers ng oxygen have adequate supplies. Ang problem lang natin siguro are the medications, the meds. I'm not sure if the supply of remdesivir, if they want the remdesivir, can be adequate. But then, yung mga mas, yung tocilizumab, right now, medyo nagkakahirapan. So, if there is going to be a surge, most probably, maapektuhan yun. But sa oxygen, yun nga, sinabi niya, meron talaga mga bigger hospitals na merong oxygen generators or oxygen plant inside. They are converting liquid oxygen to gas, oxygen gas. And so walang masyado tayong problem doon. Ang problem nila doon sa, I think, in Cebu is, of course, the space. They don't have enough probably beds. Kaya nandun parang sa labas, nakapila na. Actually, ganun. Nag-start na rin actually dito sa ibang areas namin, dito sa Region 4, na medyo nagkakaroon na ng waitlisting dito sa mga hospitals. Pero these patients belong to the asymptomatic and mild cases pa. So, hindi pa yun yung mga moderate to severe or critical cases. Pag ganun, we have no choice but to admit them with these patients.
So you think malaki po magagawa na itong 2-week lockdown?
Yes, I think so. I think it's a preemptive move on the part of the government talagang to control the movement of people. Kasi doon natin nakita na talagang this new variant is very because of its transmissibility na masyadong infectious, ang bilis sabi nga nila, few seconds na nagkaharap kayo, baka infected ka na. So it's very infectious, so that yung kinontrol nila is the yung mga mass gathering, movement ng people, then it should have an effect on the control of this virus.
Dati rin, Doc, I remember may mga doctors and nurses na na-infect, no?
Yes.
So naka-quarantine. Are you experiencing or do you expect to experience that now, given that practically all of them are vaccinated fully already, no?
Well, right now parang wala kaming ganun kadami na kung meron man reported cases, pero these are ang problem kasi ngayon is minsan maririnig mo na lang, buti kung talaga sabihin nila okay na quarantine yan because they have mild and ang problem ngayon na lang sa'yo yung isang doktor bigla na lang namatay, sabi nila gano'n, di ba? So that's medyo that's one sinasabi nila, one character of this variant na minsan talagang you're not expecting na very fatal, minsan biglang-bigla. So kasi ngayon we cannot classify agad kung this is a Delta variant kasi medyo isa yung ating genome center,
Yes.
So we cannot examine all these tests. And so sometimes ang ginagawa na lang na they are assuming